I don't know if you remember we back in the videos I did and the shows that we did around February and March, we would talk about other experts who were in the field who were ahead of all of this, and they talked about how, for example, with Johnny Anitas of Stanford University, very respected, well-respected epidemiologist, and he said this has one of the chances when it comes to the COVID-19. This has a chance to be one of the biggest evidence fiascos that we ever seen. And if you look at some of those videos, as well as mine covering those videos, one of the main things that we talked about was, okay, with the hyper emphasis of this particular disease, you may see an increase or an influx rather in people having other forms of complications. This is something a lot of people feared and why it was so dangerous to dramatize it. Even with Italy, for example, and the mistakes that they made initially on. One of those that Johnny Anitas brought up in specifically with Italy. And it's like, well, they were so scared of the virus that they were admitting people into the hospital that had no business being there. And what happens when you do that? You exhaust hospital resources. So it's these other, albeit you can call them, I don't know, some of it seems intended, but, you know, you can call it unintended consequences that are generally going to be associated. And some of these impacts we're not going to feel immediately. Some of these are going to be more long term. I talked about it before with me talking with my personal doctor. And one of the things that he had feared was that there were people, like definitely his older patients, that weren't coming in. So they weren't getting their checkups. They weren't being seen. And, you know, obviously there's issues that they could catch earlier on. And obviously, if you did like certain cancers, and if they catch it earlier on, they're going to be able to deal with it a lot more if you let it grow. But unfortunately, because everybody's freaking out about a virus with a 99% survival rate, people seem to forget that there's other things that kill people. And this is why, again, a lot of what happened is absolutely criminal. But here we got another example of this. It's coming from NBC News. Says CDC finds death from heart disease and diabetes climbed amid COVID in the U.S. Data released this week by federal health authorities shows the biggest increase in death rates for heart diseases and diabetes in at least 20 years. I'm sure that's just a coincidence that this happened this year. Let's continue on. U.S. saw remarkable increases in the death rates for heart disease, diabetes, and some other common killers in 2020. And experts believe a big reason may be that many people with dangerous symptoms made the lethal mistake of staying home from the hospital for fear of catching coronavirus. Like, when you hear stuff like this and you were ahead of it, it's got to be so frustrating. This is me, obviously, not being a guy that's in a lab coat and having gone to school for this, but I can put two and two together. And this was one of the things that we had talked about many, many times. And for people to act as if this is a surprising thing has got to be even more so frustrating for the actual experts that are in these fields that called this out and said that this would be one of the rather unintended consequences. You guys need to stop dramatizing this. There are other things that people that are more likely to die from certain illnesses. What is going on in terms of why we're focusing so much on this and its impact? Yeah, will people die? There are people dying, absolutely. But to act like there aren't people dying from other things, this is the problem when you scare people. And this is what we dealt with a lot of, fear mongering. The death rates posted online this week by federal health authorities add to the growing body of evidence that number of lives lost directly or indirectly to the coronavirus in the U.S. is far greater than the officially reported COVID-19 death toll. And of course, because you're going to have people dying from other things. Like, this was stuff that y'all were warned about. Like, I think people lose sight of how unique it was in terms of our response to this virus. This is something that the world had never done before. And I'm not saying the virus itself was something new. I'm saying, like, the reaction, the way that we had a reaction to it was we'd never done anything like that. And it's crazy because you get treated like you're the crazy one when you sit here and talk about stuff like this. Like, dude, why are we reacting in the way that we are? We have it, even when you got the data that you needed. We have the data before the virus really was hit epidemic or pandemic status here in the United States anyway. But even when you got your own data, specifically, we talk about Johnny Anitas and the Stanford study with the antibody studies. We learned way earlier than a year and some change that what the capacity, what this virus was, as far as how dangerous it was. And obviously, it wasn't nearly as dangerous as the reaction. Let's say that the governments, and this is all around the world, but the government's reaction did not match the virus itself, which is why, if anything, you should be scared of, not the virus, is that what happens when there's a virus or outbreak where it's 80% survival rate. You've told them that you do it for something with a 99% survival rate. They could scare you to fucking death. What happens when it's 80, 70? More akin to something like Ebola. If anything, that's the scary part. And then again, not the virus, less about the virus and more about the government's response and those coordinated efforts which strike fear in people, and which they completely forget that there's a vast amount of other issues that are out there, particularly, like in this context, heart diseases. For months now, researchers have known that 2020 was the deadliest year in U.S. history, primarily because of COVID-19. But the data released this week showed the biggest increases in the death rates for heart diseases and diabetes in at least 20 years. I would probably use the word alarming, says a diabetes expert from UCLA. Earlier this year, the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, and Prevention reported that nearly 3.4 million Americans died in 2020, an all-time record of those deaths. More than 345 of those were deaths attributed to COVID-19. The CDC also provided the numbers of deaths for some of the leading causes of mortality, including the nation's top two killers. By the way, the nation's top two killers, not COVID. We're talking heart diseases and cancer. I'm not going to read any further. I'm actually starting to get pissed off again. Because, again, this is stuff that we talked about. We've talked about this really early on, and they don't listen. The public experts that you guys herald in terms of who we're supposed to listen to for every goddamn thing, you don't listen. Even when it's experts that have even more, if the same or more in terms of their understanding, right, experience with dealing with infectious diseases, had been saying this, and you didn't listen. You didn't listen. You cared so much about trying to mitigate a virus with 99% survival rate. You exhausted so many resources for this, forgetting that people die of other things. And because they don't think like that. They unintended consequences. What are those? They don't think like that. They're so short-sighted that they can make this shit make sense to the American populace, and not just the American populaces around the world. It shows you if they can scare you. It doesn't even have to make sense. And then they gaslight you. They have nerve. These quacks have nerves to gaslight a lot of you. Where it's like what you directly see, right? Because what's being said right now was already predicted. It could have been avoided. But that would have required a lot of people in powerful positions to have to come out and actually tell people, chill the fuck out. And they weren't willing to do it. They had too much to gain. Unbelievable, man. You just watched a clip from my podcast, For Canon's Sake. Catch us live at 12 p.m. throughout the week over at youtube.com/YoungRipper59 and follow us over at odyssey.com/@YoungRipper59. If you want to watch the entire video cast after the show is over, just be sure to become a member on the YouTube channel. Of course, the full audio portion of the podcast is available for free on all major digital platforms, or just visit forcanonsake.com.